maybe.
Vijit, are we ready?
Yes, we are.
Okay. I welcome everyone today on behalf of Department of History, University of Delhi. We have here with us Dr. Hilal Ahmed. He is Associate Professor at CSDS New Delhi. Dr. Ahmed did his PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, 2007. He works on political Islam, Muslim politics of representation, and politics of symbols in South Asia. His first book, Muslim Political Discourse in Post-Colonial India, Monuments, Memory, Contestation, Routledge 2014, explores these thematic concerns to evolve an interdisciplinary approach to study Muslim politics. His recent works, Siyasi Muslims, A Story of Political Islam in India, and Democratic Accommodations, Minorities in Contemporary India, further elaborate these themes and attempts to explain the discursively constituted nature of contemporary Muslim political discourse in India. Dr. Ahmed is also currently working on a book project on the politics of Muslim political representation in post-colonial India. He's also editing a Hindi reader of Sudipta Kaviraj's writings. He is Associate Editor, South Asian Studies, Journal of the British Association of South Asian Studies. He was a visiting fellow at Victoria University, Wellington, 2013-14, visiting Asia Fellow, University of Dhaka, 2011, and visiting professor at University of Pune, 2011. Dr. Ahmed writes for academic journals, newspapers, and websites in English and Hindi. He has produced 2 documentaries, Encountering the Political Jama Masjid, English 2006, and Kutub, Ek Adhura Afsana, Kutub, An Unfinished Story, Hindi and English subtitles 2016. I welcome you, sir, and please, you may continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumya, for these kind words. First of all, I'm really grateful to Azi Bhai, who has actually invited me to share my work, give this lecture here. One thing I would like to make it clear that I am a product of Delhi University. And this is probably the first time that I'm speaking at history department. So in a way, it's a ghar wapsi for me. I am happy, and at the same time, I am a bit nervous. I am nervous because I am not a historian in the conventional sense of the term. My PhD actually, or even after PhD, in my postdoc also, has got some relationship with the idea of the past. So therefore, what I usually do, I don't work on history the way historians do, but I always ask a few second order questions. And these second order questions are political in nature. So therefore, what I am going to do today is basically revisiting these second order questions from the point of view of what I call process of monumentalization. So this is basically an introduction to what I'm going to do. Before I start, and I have an incomplete PowerPoint because I wanted you to convert this conversation, this seminar into a conversation. It should not be one-sided thing. What I'm actually going to do is to share a few legal issues as well as certain political issues in order to provoke you to ask a few critical questions of our time. And therefore, the idea of heritage, which we usually think is a settled issue, the purpose of this lecture is to unsettle it. So that's the first important clarification which I would like to make. The second important clarification is about the argument which I'm going to make. It's tentative, it's not final. And I would like to conclude by evoking Gandhi in a different way. I find certain references of Gandhi and heritage in a very good book, which I read long back, I think 4 or 5 years back, um, written by Sanathi Kaveri Bar. It's called Monumental Matter. I liked the book, but I was a bit uncomfortable the ways in which she used Gandhi in order to legitimize a very interesting state-centric argument. So these are the two important clarifications which I would like to make at the moment. What I'm going to do is to share my PowerPoint with you. And let me do it now. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see that the idea, the title of this presentation is to yeah. So I begin with this title. I have intentionally chosen this title because as I said that in my work, in fact, in my first book, I was a bit uncomfortable the way in which we use the term called monument or monumentalization, or more broadly, the idea of heritage. So I, in fact, I did my MPhil as well on the same topic. And the idea was to unpack the notion of monument. So this is what I'm also going to do with you today. There are basically two objectives of this lecture. First is to revisit a few crucial conceptual issues. So I asked two questions. One, what is a monument? And second, what is the process of what I call monumentalization? So these are the two conceptual issues which I'm like to address. The second objective of this presentation is to understand various meanings of the term called heritage in our post-colonial, in post-colonial India. Let me start with the conceptual issue. We often use monument, and can you give me 1 minute? I have to drink some water. I'm actually not feeling quite well. Just give me 1 minute. Yeah. So basically, what we usually do, we use monument and historic site interchangeably. This is, in my view, is not correct way of to address this question. Historic site, in my view, is a broad category and it could be understood in a number of different ways. So for instance, any old building, ruins, or protected monument can be called historic site. On the other hand, the basic function of a monument is to commemorate an idea or ideas, event, or person. So in a way, there is a conceptual difference between these two. And this distinction, I argue, is useful for our analytical purposes, which I would underline later. In my view, a historic building could also function as a monument, but because monument is also a historic building. For instance, the room in which I'm sitting at the moment is a historic building because it's contained time and space. But it would become monument only when I add an additional explanatory component with that. So this is why we have to make this crucial distinction between what we call a monument and the historic site. Though this is an analytical distinction, which won't be, we should not actually, expand it a bit more, but it is a crucial entry point into the meaning of historic site / monument. So what is a monument? In my view, a monument could have three interrelated aspects. The first aspect is object structure of site that is intentionally erected to symbolize a person or an event. These type of historic sites or monument would be called intentional monument. We all know that Alois region make this very crucial distinction between intentional monument and unintentional monument. So the intentional monument is the monument which is intentionally created to commemorate a person or an event at a particular historical moment. But there is other form of monument that is not an intentional monument by definition. So any object or structure or site whose meaning is determined not by their makers, but by our own perception. So this is actually Humayun's tomb. So if you could actually look at this building, the inside part, the dome, the small dome, is part of a monument proper. That is because it was intentionally erected. But the outside walls are not intentionally erected. These are the boundaries. But because of the association, the close association between the entire complex in which this site is located, we can conclude by saying that it is actually an intentional as well as an unintentional monument. But the most important aspect of monument in both the cases is the object structure or site. So the first thing is that should be some site or object. But remember that in many cases, the disappearance of site or structure also make that empty space a monument. For example, Bamiyan Buddha. So I'll come to Bamiyan Buddha later, but at the moment, just start with this basic conceptual entry point into the idea of monument, that any object, structure, or site that is intentionally or unintentionally erected for commemorating a person or an event can be the first aspect of the idea of monument in a broader sense. The second idea, which is associated with this notion of monument, is the story. It should have certain story to tell. For example, if I want to conserve the room where I'm sitting, I have to have certain kind of story associated with that. For instance, this is the very room when I was actually doing some kind of a work with my Lokniti team way back in 1990s. I first visited this room, which is my office at the moment. So if I link that moment when I first enter in this room and at the moment where I'm sitting exactly on the same side, commemorating that event when I first enter in this room, that would become a story. So if I say that this is an important historic building, historic room for me, it would become a monument because I am actually trying to link it to something called a story with it. So the first thing is an object or a site. Second is the story, which is associated with a person or an event or a moment. That is the second aspect of a monument. And the third is the mode of commemoration. How we are going to actually commemorate that idea, which is associated with this particular object or site. Now, these three things can be explained in a number of different ways. But when it comes to collective commemoration, collective monument or national monument, this will become a complex question, because who will decide which object structure would be treated as a monument? What kind of stories which we are going to associate with these buildings, which we identify crucial as monument of the nation, and what would be the mode by which we are going to commemorate them? So this third aspect, the commemoration, is something which actually defines the idea of heritage in a broader sense of the term. So this is a very important entry point into the realm of the process of monumentalization. So let me just summarize what I just said. Basically, I'm making a distinction between a historic building and a monument. And in my view, there are three important aspects of a monument which makes it important and conceptually distinct. One is object structure side, second is the idea and story, and third is we have got number of different kind of historic buildings. And as I said that I'm not a historian, but my first book was partly historical in a way that I traced this process of monumentalization in colonial India. But I'm not going to talk about that at the moment. For me, what is important is the process of monumentalization and what are the characteristics of this process. So if you have a variety of old buildings in front of you, in what ways the process of monumentalization would begin? So I suggest that when a building is actually differentiated from other buildings, meaning that this building is important than the other building, the physical characteristic of identified buildings are treated as symbols. Its architectural properties are measured. Certain historical and artistic values of the building are determined. Its history is traced, and finally the building is actually preserved as a heritage of a nation, community, or people. And all the combination of all these aspects actually contribute to what I call the process of monumentalization. So what is important here is that one building is important than the other buildings. So that the process, so the first aspect is differentiation. Second is, because this building is different, we have to actually trying to find out the symbols which are associated with this particular building. Third is, because it contains time and space, what are the important architectural attribute it has, because these are the most visible aspect of that very site or building. Then there is a history of it and the artistic value of it. And finally, because of all the amalgamation of all these aspects, there is a need to protect this building. So the process of monumentalization in a broader sense is inevitably linked to the process of conservation. Now, before I go further, it is important to point out that in archaeology, there are two important things. One is conservation and other is preservation. Conservation, preservation, and other is excavation. So what is known, known heritage is always actually treated as an object to be conserved. But at the same time, because the archaeology is always a work in progress, the excavation is also an important aspect, meaning that we have to also dig out new past in order to actually construct the holistic picture of the past so that we can make sense of our present in a more comprehensive manner. Now, this important relationship between conservation and excavation has got a very interesting relationship with the idea of heritage in India, in colonial as well as in post-colonial India. So this is a very fascinating picture of Firoz Shah Kotla, which is located near ITO. Yeah, just hold on. Let me take some more water. And with this building, what I'm actually trying to show is that this is a 19th century painting of that building, in which we can see that some kind of a building is shown as if it is a ruin, but at the same time, it has got certain artistic value that has to be preserved. So that part, meaning the conservation part, is clear. But what about the excavation? Meaning, now the colonial imagination of India's past, as we all know, was very interesting because on the one hand, the past, the India's past, is seen as a battleground of conflict. Thomas Morris's work, James Mill, and then many others, they repeatedly tell us that actually the flow of Indian civilization that was read entirely in Hindu terms was somehow disturbed with what they call the Muslim invasion. So the idea of Muslim invasion was crucial as some kind of an external push. And this external push actually makes both of these ideas, conservation as well as excavation, more problematic. because it is by this, there is an implied meaning of it that whatsoever has to be conserved has got an intrinsic relationship with something that existed beneath that. So therefore, Indo-Islamic historic architecture was always seen as a contested site. But let us quickly look at the nature of Muslim architectural heritage. Why Muslim architectural heritage was seen as a problem category in colonial India. Firstly, and most importantly, as I said, that Indian past was seen as an uninterrupted flow of events, person, and processes, which was actually disturbed by Islamic invasion. The coming of Islam was seen that some kind of a rupture. And therefore, Indo-Islamic buildings were either linked to the famous debate on the desecration of Hindu temples, or they were actually conceptualized as a symbol of Islamic dominance. So therefore, Muslim presence on Indian soil on historical basis in terms of heritage became contested. The second part was actually archaeological. The second aspect of this contestation was archaeological. The conservation of Indo-Islamic site, as I said, as protected monument, was in principle opposite to the larger objective, namely the search for a real, authentic Hindu past. So the argument goes like this, that if you want to actually search authentic Indian past, you have to actually dig beneath these buildings to find out what actually existed beneath these. Now, finally, in the later period, Indo-Islamic building would also became problematic because many of these declared historical monuments were the Waqf properties. Since the overarching definition of monument did not consider the Waqf character of the site, even now there is a lot of problem with these issues. Muslim architectural presence in India became an endless legal conflict, and such a commission report also point out that we need to actually create some kind of a synthesis between 1958 law that protects historical monument and various laws which are there in India. So therefore, what I'm actually trying to argue is there is a contested idea of Muslim architectural heritage, and this colonial legacy somehow continue to survive in post-colonial India. I'll give you one example of the Indian archaeological policy, because why this is important, because this policy is still surviving in a different form, because on the basis of this policy, the conservation manual, the famous Marshall Conservation Manual of 1923 was actually constituted or made, and it is still in use. There is a strong emphasis on this policy was a strict neutrality, the principle of strict neutrality, meaning that the functional part of the religious site of a monument should always be seen very, very sensitively and creatively, because in India, there is no possibility to have an overarching framework because of the presence of different kind of buildings in India. So there's a clause 19 which says that in this country, it is impractical to lay down one law which will be applicable to every case. Thus, and they said that there is a need to have a distinction between the older monument like Buddhist, Jain or Hindus, and the more modern erections of Mohammedans on the other. And in this case, the Muslim one, the policy of limited restoration, not only desirable, but justified on the ground that the art of original builder is still a living art. So therefore, so what is important here is that strict neutrality. You have to define a particular building in religious terms, entirely in religious terms, and this religious categorization is used in a very straightforward manner, meaning a very clear demarcation between Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Buddhist buildings were actually established in order to make every building different. So therefore, the idea that a building would eventually be, if there is a Hindu building, it cannot have any Muslim element, and vice versa. So therefore, what I'm actually trying to argue here is that very strange and strict secularism of conservation as a principle was established in colonial India. But in post-colonial India, something very interesting happened in post-colonial India. What? The partition of India actually, changed the map, the archaeological map of the country. So Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, or some other important insights, Mughal and Pathan monuments were in India. So therefore, the unity in diversity argument of Nehru somehow survived. But it was actually very difficult for the Pakistani establishment to construct a new history of Pakistani monument. But what is interesting is that in post-colonial India, the question of monumentalization was actually asked in a different way. What was that? The three crucial elements of the process of monumentalization in post-colonial India. First, as I said, that who would decide which monument would become a monument of national importance? So the ultimate answer was the state, and state meaning the central government. So the central government would decide the fate of a particular monument as monument of national importance, while the state governments were empowered to define the monument of state importance. So we have actually now got two kinds of monuments: monument of national importance and monument of state importance. Now, the second important question was, what would be the nature of the story which we are going to associate with these buildings? What would be a nation, people, or community? To actually answer this question, the 1958 Act, and before 1958 Act, there are various other set of laws that was introduced and bylaws that were introduced in India. And the emphasis was on the idea of public purpose. So a building would become a monument because it was treated a monument because the purpose of commemorating the past is always defined in terms of what is officially called public purpose. So I'll come to this idea of public purpose later, but we have to remember that the central government has got immense power, not only to decide what is a monument, which one is going to be a protected monument or not, but also the idea that what kind of story which we are going to associate with these buildings. Finally, the legal part of it. So the Ancient Monument Archaeological Site and Remains Act 1958, which is still modeled on another law that was passed in 1904. And this act actually provides three things. One, it empowers the central government to list monuments as ancient monument as well as protected monuments. So the listing is, all the monument would be called monument in terms of preparing a list. But when central government actually takes care of the protection of a particular building, that would become a protected monument. And these protected monuments were always defined as monuments of national importance. And the third important aspect of the legality of the Ancient Monument and Archaeological Site Remain Act is about the process of excavation, meaning you have to further explore the past that is not yet discovered. So therefore, the listing, conservation, and excavation, these are the three important constraints of the element of the legality of the process of monumentalization. So let me just summarize what I just said, that the state would decide which building, which story, and which building, which story, and the mode of commemoration, so that the story of heritage could be understood in what officially called the public purpose. So we have to be very clear about these things, that in India, the central government has got immense power to define what a monument is. So therefore, the idea of heritage is inextricably linked to these powers. So what are these powers? Let me quickly look at this figure to explain what I mean by the power of the central government. Basically, there are four powers. One is what I call nationalization of a monument. Second is there is, and these are not my words, these are not my interpretation. I have tried to actually unpack the ancient monument and archaeological sites and Remains Act 1958 to work out the concept of national importance. So if we look at this act, there are actually basically four powers of the central government. First, central government, as I said, may decide which building should be treated as a monument of national importance, meaning the nationalization of monument. So for this purpose, they would actually, according to section 4.1, they would identify a set of building and then declare it as a monument of national importance. But prior to that, a public notice would be issued, and if any objection comes, they would be treated as objection and the process would continue. The consultation process will begin. So that's the part of nationalization. So if the government thinks that this building, which is 100 years old, and it should be treated as a monument of national importance, it can do that, but there is a process of it. Now, second, what are the ways in which a building is acquired to become a monument of national importance? First is that if something called gift, a building is gifted to the central government, it would become a monument of national importance. If a building is abandoned, if a building is abandoned, it can also be declared as a monument of national importance if the central government decides. Third, if there is a functional building which is in use, and there is an agreement with the owner of that building, the part of that building would be declared a monument of national importance. And finally, the central government is also empowered to actually purchase a land or a building or a site to declare the monument of national importance. So that's the second power of central government, to acquire buildings. So these are the four ways in which a building can be acquired to become a monument of national importance. Now, the interesting part is section 16, which says that government is also empowered to decide the religion of a monument of national importance. Because remember that as in the archaeological policy of 1915, nothing can be done inside a building inconsistent of its character, its religious character. So the government has got a tremendous power to define what is a religion of a monument. What is interesting in section 16 is that there should be only one religion of a building. So that is something which is a gray area, which always actually create a lot of possibility for communal politics in the country. And final power, the fourth power central government has, is the denationalization of a monument of national importance. Suppose if the central government thinks that a particular building is no longer important to commemorate the idea of heritage in India, it has got a power to denationalize it. Suppose, for instance, Taj Mahal. If government thinks that Taj Mahal is no longer, fulfilling the purpose of the story of India, which we called official idea of heritage, it has got a tremendous power to, according to this act, section 35 says that it can actually de-recognize this very building or monument of national importance. So there is all possibility. So what I say, let me take some water. So what I argue here is that the central government has got a power to not merely to nationalize monument, but also to denationalize them. So in this context, it is important what Nehru had to say on the idea of heritage. In a speech which he delivered in December 1961, when ASI completed its 100th, and in fact, these are the bases on which the whole idea or the principle of conservation are established in India. He said that in this highly utilitarian age, how does one justify archaeology? And he also said that there was a direct conflict between claims of today in sense of practical utility and claim of the past. We are troubled by this conflict, but it was inevitable that we should decide ultimately in favor of the present. And that turned out to be the best way of preserving the past. So here is clear that past has always to be defined in relation to the present, especially in terms of heritage. Now, remember that this is 1958, where central government has got tremendous power to nationalize and denationalize a particular building in favor of the story which it would like us to remember as the official story of India. But this is something which Nehru says that it means that the political consideration of the present are to be taken into serious, are to be taken as the ultimate criterion to define the idea of heritage in India. So that's pretty much clear from this point. On the basis of that, there are basically two established principles of conservation, and I call them principles of neutrality. The first principle is this: the Indian historic site, particularly the monument of national importance, are to be conserved in such a manner that the objective national history of India could be displayed. And this principle was actually adopted in 1951. And as a result, whenever you go to any monument of national importance, you may find an interesting story written over there. The second important part, now what do I mean by dead entities? So there are basically two kinds of monuments. One are the monuments which are functional and the other are non-functional. Functional monument means, for instance, a monument where religious practices are happening. And the dead monuments are the monuments where we do not have any religious activity happening. Why this distinction is important? Because the date of notification is very important. So on the very date when a particular building is converted into a monument of national importance, the very practice that was actually going on inside the premises of that building would also be conserved as the basic religious character according to section 16 of that very monument. But that's the gray area. That monument would be conserved as dead entities. Now, this dead entities meaning, suppose a mosque is conserved on the very day, 15th of August 1957, where there was no religious activity happening, or a temple where no arti was happening, that would entirely become a monument of a dead historical monument, and there is no possibility to reopen that building for religious purposes. Now, this strict definition actually offers immense possibility to communal politics to survive in the country. The first book, Muslim Political Discourse in Post-Colonial India, I studied Jama Masjid quite extensively while evoking this functional and non-functional, the distinction between functional and non-functional monument. So, but we have to remember these two things. But at the same time, we also have to remember that there was another form of secularism that was introduced by the Indian Constitution. That was the participatory secularism, meaning that Indian communities were encouraged to celebrate religion as some kind of a culture, so as to give them some collective rights. On the other hand, the monuments were conserved with a different secular principle, which I call secularism of strict neutrality. So we have a conflict between two forms of secularism. One is the conservation secularism, which I called secularism of strict neutrality. This is what I just explained. And there is another form of secularism, which I call secularism of historical monument, the secularism of the participatory secularism, where the idea of collective cultural expression is recognized. So we have Kumbh Mela, we have Urs, etc. But at the same time, there is a different form of secularism at work, which looks at historic side as entirely strictly dead entities. Just hold on. Now, this is an example of how these principles of neutrality are worked out. This is quite known place, Qutub Minar. I have made a film on this, so if you want, you can just Google that. You may find it on Wire, and you may also find it on YouTube. What is interesting in this is the inscription which is actually installed at the entrance of the Qutub complex, especially the Quwwatul Islam Masjid. If you look at the construction of this narrative, the introductory history, you may find three things in it. First is that there is a very interesting description of the history of the building, where this building is called Quwwatul Islam or Might of Islam, where it is said that the element of 27 Hindu and Jain temples were used to erect this building. It's a very, very polite way of representing this building. But at the same time, if you look at the later description, you find that the emphasis on the architectural design and the feature of this building. So both of these principles are actually highlighted. So unity in diversity principle is somehow conceptualized in such a way that the focus should be given more on the physical characteristic of the building, so that some kind of a neutral interpretation can be evolved. So that was purely Nehru's idea. And if you look at all the historic buildings, especially in North India, you may find that the description of this kind. But as I said, that this principle of neutrality are subject to multiple interpretations. So one interpretation is this: if you go to Qutub Minar, you may find a very interesting, all of these. Now that's the English one, and on the next corner there's a Hindi one. So if you read the Hindi one, you will get a very different kind of interpretation. So here in this case, it says that if you read the first paragraph, it says that जिसमें प्रयुक्त खंबे और दूसरी वास्तु सामग्री मूलतः 27 हिंदू एवं जैन मंदिरों को ध्वस्त करके प्राप्त की गई थी. So word ध्वस्त meaning destroyed. But here in the English version of it, the word destroyed is nowhere mentioned. It is quite a polite way of introducing it. So as I said, that even the linguistic translation will give you a very different sense of these two principles of neutrality and conservation. Now, let me just look at one interesting debate on the idea of a mosque. In order to understand the functioning of these two forms of secularism, which are actually available in India. So the first, let me ask three questions, and then I answer this question. What would be the response of secularism of historical monument to that, and what would be the argument which would come from the secularism of minority rights, and how the conflict between these two forms of secularism would lead us to a few unresolved issues. So the first question is, can the state acquire any functional mosque or temple? The secularism of historical monument would say yes, of course, because national importance is a public purpose, and waqf status of a mosque cannot be treated as an essential practice of Islam. This is also applicable to any temple. that, all right, if the central government decide that a particular religious building could be acquired by this logic, by 1958 Act, it can acquire. But the secularism of the participatory religious secularism, especially secularism of minority rights, would say no. Because a functional mosque, especially mosque, is intrinsically linked to religious practices, and B, religious places of worship has got a special status. Again, in this case, the immunity of religious places of worship is evoked, and there are many Supreme Court decisions which say this. Now, the unresolved issue is this: how could a secular judiciary, based on rational principle, determine the essential practices and non-essential practices of a religion? And if I interpret this unresolved issue in political sense, how could we say that the central government determine the public purpose? Because that's not parliament, the executive. How the executive will determine that this is the public purpose for which a particular kind of building has to be taken as an monument? So this is the gray area, and because of this gray area, there are a number of political things, the number of political campaigns actually laid in the country. Now, the second question is equally important. What about the acquisition of a non-functional mosque would be treated as a dead monument? Once a mosque or a temple or a church which was not functional at a time of acquisition would be treated as a dead building, meaning it would be treated as a secular monument, meaning the religious participatory secularism, especially the secularism that protect minority rights, would say a mosque is always a mosque, and similarly a temple would always be a temple, and its conservation into a monument of a secular kind would actually affect or undermine its religious character. Now, again, there is a conflict. Now, the question which would be actually for the politician to play politics, it could be that could it be an adverse position acquired by the Archaeological Survey of India to be protected as a monument of national importance, and the religious communities are not given rights? Will it be all right? Can't we say that's an adverse position by the state? This is again unsolved, and therefore it leads to multiple interpretation, especially in political realm. The final question is, what would be the nature of worship in a protected mosque and a temple? Suppose a mosque is protected, the outer building of the mosque is protected, and the inside activities is also protected by that. What would be the mode of that? So remember that according to the 1958 law and the various rules of Archaeological Survey of India, a monument is open till sunset, sunrise to sunset. Now, this sunrise to sunset time period does not confirm for example, if that is a case of mosque, it does not confirm the prayer times as per the Islamic practices. So what would happen to the first prayer, that is Asr prayer, that is before the sunrise? And what about the Isha prayer, which is going to happen after the sunset? So therefore, again, the secularism of historical monument would say that those ritual activities which were being practiced on the very date of notification would be allowed as per the laws. But the participatory secularism would say right to worship cannot be restricted. Means if my right is to offer 5-time namaz inside the mosque, I should be given unrestricted access to that building. Now, the complicated question is, which is given here, can the date of notification be treated as the ultimate criteria to determine the religious character of a building? As I said, that this column is something which gives us immense, the sources of politics actually are coming from here. Now, let me just summarize what Nehru would say. What is the Nehruvian idea of Indian heritage? Because that is a very powerful idea, and some way or the other is still surviving. So the first thing from Nehru's conception was that idea of heritage has to be defined from the point of view of the present, meaning it is a work in progress. This is what I just explained. Secondly, according to Nehru, the constitutional notion of unity and diversity has to be taken as a workable framework for defining Indian heritage. And thirdly, he would say that the secularism of strict neutrality will contribute to the secularism of minority rights in the long run. Now, this is Nehru's imagination of the Nehruvian proposal for Indian heritage. When I say Nehruvian, I'm not actually restrict everything to Nehru, but the manner in which that kind of conception of Indian heritage actually continued to survive for a long time, and in various ways it is still surviving. Remember that things have not yet changed at all in terms of official meaning of a historic building, including the Indo-Islamic architecture in the country. Now, but this imagination, this Nehruvian imagination is problematic. This possibility for the political elite to interpret historic buildings / monument in a number of different ways and to organize their politics around these issues. Now, but there are three very important and broad comments which I would like to make. First is that heritage as a work in progress thesis, in my view, somehow empowers the political elite to establish the official meaning of heritage as the ultimate reference point, meaning that there is an emphasis on the official meanings of heritage, as if that the popular meanings do not have any space in this framework. So everything is actually from the above, not from below. So therefore, the people's meaning of historical monument is something which are not actually taken into seriously, into consideration while treating heritage as a work in progress thesis. Now, this unity in diversity thesis, the second principle of Nehruvian proposal, is again problematic because some way or the other, if you look at Nehru's writing from 1940s, his speeches and his later writing, we may find that actually Nehruvian thesis is quite elitist, that it celebrates somehow the contribution of elites, not the contribution of people. So therefore, in Nehru's framework, Akbar or Ashoka would become a significant reference point, not the common Muslims or Hindus. So therefore, this unity in diversity principle actually interpreted, especially in terms of heritage debate, entirely in elitist terms. So therefore, there is a need to actually question that elitism, because in the later communal conflict, some way or the other, revolved around this elitist imagination of Indian past. And there were a lot of debate on the, for example, there are a lot of debate on the figure of Aurangzeb. So one section of Indian scholars and public intellectuals, they question Aurangzeb as a symbol of Islamic iconoclasm, etc. But at the same time, Aurangzeb was defended by another section. But no one actually questioned that this framework is coming from this unity, this elitist conception of unity in diversity. I'm actually just trying to flag this in order to have some more meaningful discussion on this point. The third proposal which Nehru makes was that secularism of strict neutrality will contribute to the secularism of minority rights. As I pointed out here, that though there is certainly an emphasis on that, no serious legal efforts made to resolve this conflict. And that's the reason why when such a commission was constituted, they looked at these legal issues, which I have discussed here quite extensively, and proposed a solution to solve them. Now, I conclude by looking at some of Gandhi's position on that. As I said in the beginning, that in Monumental Matter, Sanathi Kauri Baur makes a very powerful argument that eventually Gandhi was also evoking Mughal monument in order to justify secularism of some kind. I broadly agree with her, but my take on this is different. And in my view, what I call people's meaning of heritage, I think Gandhi would be an important reference point for us. So in this case, I'll tell you, I'll share two things very quickly. This is a quote from Sushila Nair's book, Mahatma Gandhi, Indian Awakened, where she is actually narrating Gandhi's experiences when he first visited Qutub Minar. And she said, Bapu told us in the Aga Khan Palace detention camp how the sight had made him feel sick at heart. Gandhiji symbolized in his person equal respect for all religion, memories of religious fanaticism responsible for the destruction of Hindu temple caused him deep pain. Now, this is certainly clear from Gandhi that he is not interested in who did what when. Why? Because there is a different conception of history in his framework. I think I should stop here and invite you. I can make that point later, but it would be better if we all discuss that. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilal sir, for such an insightful talk. And now I would like to invite the participants from the meeting. If they have any question or comment to make, please raise your hands and open your audio, and please you can talk to Ahmed sir. Otherwise, we can move.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions here.
Yes,
long
sir.
questions, I think.
Yes, sir.
So,
actually, your talk was live on Facebook as well. So there are a lot of comments and questions from Facebook as well. So if there's no one from the meeting, I can just move on to the chat box now. Okay. So, sir, there's the first question by Shailendra Mohan Jha sir from Facebook. He says that afterlife of any monument, if you want to comment on functionality of the monuments were not used for its original purpose, but for any other purpose, maybe cultural or political purposes, your views.
I think I have answered this question in my talk. My purpose in this talk is not to offer any solution, etc. The purpose was to problematize the ways in which the framework of conservation is evoked and how that framework contribute to the meanings of heritage. So the idea is to unsettle the given meaning of a settled notion of a heritage. So when suppose a monument is not used for the purpose it is made, I think again we have to just we have to look at on case to case basis, and only then we'll be in a position to respond to question of these kinds. Yeah.
Okay, so there's, I think this is a more of a comment by Himanshu Prabhare. He says that as former chairperson of the National Monuments Authority, he would like to clarify the differentiation that you had made between national and state protected monuments. At present, India has more than 3,500 nationally protected monuments, and of these, more than 2,200 monuments were declared nationally protected due to prior to 1947, that is by the colonial state, whose policy you termed as neutral. Some of the monuments in the princely states were incorporated in the list of nationally protected at the time of independence, and only a few of new monuments and archaeological sites have been added to the list. And he also wants to remind the audience and everyone that a majority of I think I lost it. And that a majority of monuments in India remain unprotected.
Himanshu Prabhare is she. Himanshu Prabhare is
Oh,
she.
sorry. I'm so sorry about this. Actually, I didn't check
No,
Facebook.
this is actually
I just saw the chat box directly.
By the way, this is a very important point, and this is basically a comment. And I have dealt that extensively in my book. So I agree with that. And, obviously this is the point, because in 1 hour talk, you have to cover a lot of things. So I did not touch upon this issue, but this is an absolutely important point which is highlighted here. And I completely agree with that. Yeah. Then there
Okay,
is
so
another
yes, sir. We have
possible
Parul
disassociation.
Pandyadhar. We
Yeah.
have Parul
From
Pandyadhar,
Facebook.
ma'am, and she wants to thank you first of all. And
Thank
how,
you.
in your view, would it be possible to dissociate in practice the contemporary perceptions of a monumentalized historical building from the perceptions of its makers in a remote past? Can these be compartmentalized as such? Would not past perceptions carry forward into the present alongside the more recent commemorative accretions in the present? Also, could not a historical building undergo what I would like to term as multiple monumentalizations in the past and in the present?
I think this is actually an expression of the elaborated use of the framework which I offered. So I think I would agree with her. This is a crucial way to interpret the building, because I'm not saying that whatsoever I conceptualized as monumentalization is fixed and cannot be changed. There can be multiple ways in which this idea of monumentalization can be expanded. So I think this comment reminds us the multiplicity of the process of monumentalization itself. So, but one point I would like to make it clear, that we have very, the business of intentional and unintentional monument in India, I think we have to be very clear about it. Because most of the monuments in India are unintentional, because of their sheer presence or their visibility makes them monument, because over the years we have identified them as a historic building, etc. So therefore, the point is that there could be multiple ways in which the idea of monumentalization can be understood.
Okay, thank you, sir. And also, there's another by Shobhana Warrior through Facebook. Thanks for the presentation. Is it really about monuments at all? And wish we had really a sense of conversation.
Actually, this is not about monument at all. It is about the politics of monument. So basically, in the beginning, I clarified that I'm not a historian, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm not a legal expert. I am a political scientist, and my vantage point empowers me to look at things in a different way. And that's why, as I said, that I'm not interested in producing or creating a new history. I am asking second order question of political kind, because and we have a lot of great work. So on the basis of that work, there is a possibility to ask theoretical as well as political questions.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir, please, Razi sir, please. Your mic is mute, sir. Razi sir, your mic is mute.
This is a very interesting complexities which, as we like to put it, unpacking all the complexities regarding historic buildings and monuments, monumentalization of different kinds of historic buildings and monuments, etc. So, and you are a big expert on, especially on Jama Masjid. And so I would like you to speak more on its current status, in the sense that it is certainly live and functional for 400 years now. And, with all the powers of the state and the ASI, ASI can't take it over completely. And the Delhi Waqf Board is not powerful enough. The Imam and his followers are an important party that becomes political very, very aggressively at times. But is the Imam really so very powerful always for all Muslims? And what is the current status on it in terms of the site and its future, as it were? Is the networking? Were you able to hear, Hilal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. Razibhai, I got your point. Yeah. Shall I answer?
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, my connection was somehow, yes, I said that in the beginning, my connection has got some problem, but I think it's fixed now. Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Yes, sir,
Okay.
you're audible.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this question, Razibhai. Actually, let me tell you one thing. Jama Masjid was not a proper protected monument. ASI has got actually there are three possibilities by which you can conserve that. If you can make an arrangement with the body that protects that building. You can also then give some money to that body to conserve or to protect the outer building. You actually acquire the building and allow the practice to go on. Jama Masjid was actually a waqf building. It was a registered waqf. Still, it's a registered waqf, by the way. So I have got this record with me, which is published by Delhi Waqf Board some time back in 2009 or something. So it's a waqf property. The money is given to, used to be given to Delhi Waqf Board for the protection of the building. Imam of Jama Masjid was actually appointed by the Delhi Waqf Board, but because of the association of the historic association of this family for over 400, 300 more, something very interesting happened. So somehow the 11th Imam, the father of the present Imam, became politically conscious of the status of Jama Masjid as a political monument. And he fought a very interesting battle against the board, and he decided not to actually give any money to Delhi Waqf Board and captured the mosque in 1971-76. What is interesting is that since then, nothing has happened. So it has now become de facto property for the Imam of Jama Masjid. What is interesting is, and I am actually working on a paper. So at that point of time, from say, I think that was in 1946 or something, one introductory history was written by the Delhi Waqf Board, and it was installed at the gate of Jama Masjid. I have used that introductory history in my book. Now, very recently, when I visit the site, I find that history is completely changed and removed. It is a story of Imam and his family. So now the thing is that still ASI gives money to Jama Masjid to protect. The interesting is that Imam has become the de facto authority to use Jama Masjid as a political center. So this transfer, as I said, as I just pointed out, that what are the contested issues by which a building is defined in monument, actually has got tremendous capacity and potential to provide material to do politics of this kind to political elite, whether it's Hindutva elite or a Muslim elite. So there is a long history in Delhi, and Jama Masjid is something which is a very important reference point of that politics. So now legally, Jama Masjid is still a waqf property owned by the Delhi Waqf Board, but practically, Imam of Jama Masjid is the de facto king of that building.
No, that's very interesting. So what is the legal position on it? Is the law recognizing anything that Imam Bukhari wanted to do? It cannot, isn't it?
See, the legal position is that they have acquired the outer area of the building. They have constructed 4 or 5 big hotels around it. And in fact, Jama Masjid is a very big waqf. So they have the outer part of the building is now the outer garden of the build, the outer park which are surrounded, but there is also graveyard adjacent to Jama Masjid. And in this graveyard, there are very old graves of all the old imam and the people who are associated with the construction of this building. So they have actually acquired that graveyard, and it is now the resting place of the 11th imam who actually discovered the political potential of Imam Abdullah Bukhari. So Imam Abdullah Bukhari's grave is also there. So the legal position is that is actually acquired all the building legally, but the building proper, Jama Masjid proper, is still a Waqf property.
So maybe if there are other questions, Soumya, then in the chat box.
Yes, sir. Actually, I thought Hilal sir's audio and video were disconnected a little. Okay.
Please, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
there is some problem, but now
Yes.
I think it's back. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's another question in the chat box, sir, by Sanjeev Nandan Prasad. Thanks for the presentation. And in case of some important monuments, the intrusion of the market dangerously close, almost creating a solid frame around these monuments. Does it portend a future for a different appropriation or use of these monuments?
See, again, as I said, that I am not interested what would happen in the future, but there is a strong possibility. See, after liberalization, something which we have not yet paid close attention to is the process by which the opening up of market and the reconstitution of idea of heritage happens. We must remember that now it's possible for anyone to actually take a monument for the conservation purposes. Means you can adopt a monument or something like that. So this process of you can do that, but not the religious body. So until and unless you solve this contestation, so on the one hand, this is complete open up. You can own this monument, etc. But on the other hand, a religious body cannot adopt a monument. So therefore, I think there are a lot of overlapping, and this overlapping always contributes significantly to the politics of monument itself. So my work is entirely on the political side of it. So obviously, there is a lot of possibilities, and these possibilities contribute significantly, as I said, to the ways in which political arguments are constructed.
Okay, so there's another one, and we might then just end this talk here. By Vera Lazzaretti. Thanks, Hilal, for the fascinating work you do. I'd like you to say a bit more about the concept of denationalization. Do we know of any case of denationalization in post-colonial India? Is there a serious risk that a monument be denationalized in contemporary India, according to you? How would that require? Thanks.
Vera is a friend. So no, at least I don't know. Is there any effort to denationalize a monument? But there is a strong possibility to do that, because central government has got great powers to actually denationalize any monument at any point of time. At least I don't know that it has happened or not, but there is a possibility. So it all depends, as I said, as I also made this point in my lecture, that there is an immense power to executive and the central government. So central government is empowered to actually do so in various ways. It all depends on the political considerations.
Okay. So I think there are no more questions in the chat box and on Facebook. And if there's anybody else in the Zoom meeting, if you want to ask any question or comment, please come up. Otherwise, we will just end this talk here. Okay, so I don't think there's another question here. So thank you so much, Hilal sir, for such a fascinating talk. And even though you were not feeling well, you were here with us and you gave this interesting information to us. Thank you everyone for joining the meeting. And I would like to add on by saying that we have another talk on 10th of November. The topic is Tracing India on the Silk Road by Professor Monica Zinn. I would like everyone to join us again here on 10th of November. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Razi bhai. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.